everyone. As part of the endocrine system, in this lecture, we will cover the adrenal glands and the hormones they release, and also how this will affect our bodies. The adrenal glands are these wedges of glandular and neuroendocrine tissue that will sit on top of the kidneys, as we can see over here. Since we have two kidneys, one on each side, we will have two adrenal glands. For the adrenal glands to secrete their hormones, they will need to be influenced by the hormones that are released from the anterior pituitary. But first, the hypothalamus is the one that secretes the corticotropin releasing hormone that will then send a signal to the anterior pituitary gland to secrete the adrenocorticotropic hormone, and this hormone is the one that will act on the adrenal glands to stimulate them to secrete their hormones. They will have this very rich blood supply, and this will cause this gland to experience actually one of the highest rates of blood flow in the body. Now, as we can see from this image, the adrenal cortex is the outer layer of the adrenal gland, and it will be subdivided into three different zones. We have the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. In each of these different zonas or areas, they will secrete their own hormones. And then internally, in the middle, we have the adrenal medulla, which will then secrete its own hormones as well. And these are examples over here of the hormones that are secreted in each of these areas. So in the zona glomerulosa, we have aldosterone that's secreted, and that's a type of the mineralocorticoids. In the zona fasciculata, we have mainly cortisol, but we also have corticosterone and cortisone, and these are types of glucocorticoids. Then in the zona reticularis, we have androgens, which an example is dehydroepiandrosterone, or DHEA. You guys know I'm not going to say that word again. And then the adrenal medulla is going to secrete stress hormones, more specifically epinephrine and norepinephrine, and we will see all those in details, but this image here is good because it gives you a little review of everything that's happening and where it is happening on the adrenal glands. Let's start with the adrenal cortex, and it will be a component of what we call the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or HPA axis. And this will secrete steroid hormones that are important for the regulation of several functions. These are the long-term stress response, blood pressure and blood volume, nutrient uptake and storage, fluid and electrolyte balance, and even inflammation. The adrenal cortex, it will produce more than 24 hormones. That's how important this gland is. And collectively, sometimes they're referred to as adrenocorticosteroids. And these hormones are vital. If, for example, the adrenal gland needs to be removed or maybe it's destroyed, then these corticosteroids, they must be administered or the person will not survive. Corticosteroids, they will exert their effects on metabolic operations by determining which genes are going to be transcribed in the target cells and what the rate of this transcription is. So this is how important this gland is. Now let's go over what each zona of the adrenal cortex will do. First, we have the zona glomerulosa, which will produce what we call the mineralocorticoids. The main one that they produce is what we call aldosterone. And this hormone will target the kidney cells that regulate the ionic composition of urine. So as a result of this, it will cause the retention of water and sodium ions. In exchange, it will get rid of potassium ions. And by doing this, it prevents or reduces the loss of fluid in urine. And it also reduces the water and sodium ion losses from, for example, sweat glands and salivary glands. And in addition, it will prevent the loss of these ions and waters in the digestive tract as well. And when is it that aldosterone is secreted? Well, we can list at least 3 different reasons here. The first one is when the zona granulosa is stimulated by a fall in blood sodium ion levels. Also, when there's a rise in blood potassium ion levels, or when you have the arrival of another hormone, which is called the angiotensin II hormone. And angiotensin II, which is also released by the adrenal cortex, it causes vasoconstriction, which will then increase the blood pressure. Therefore, all these hormones have basically the same function, which is to decrease water loss and increase blood pressure. And what is another hormone that you think might have the release triggered in the presence of angiotensin II? I will give you a hint because it is another hormone that is released by the posterior pituitary gland and that will exert the same function as these two that are released by the adrenal cortex. And in other words, aldosterone and angiotensin II. Well, if you thought of the antidiuretic hormone, you're correct. So all of these hormones will have the same function, which is keep water in the body, retain sodium because water always follows sodium, and also increase blood pressure. If you have more fluid circulating, you will increase the blood pressure. Next, we have the zona fasciculata, and this zone is going to be the thickest of them all with regards to the zones that are located in the adrenal cortex, and it will release glucocorticoids in response to the adrenocorticotropic hormone from the anterior pituitary gland. Now, cortisol and corticosterone are the most important glucocorticoids secreted by the adrenal cortex. In addition, the liver will also convert some of the circulating cortisol into cortisone, which is another active glucocorticoid. So together, these hormones, they speed up the rate of glucose synthesis and glycogen formation, especially within the liver. And in addition, they will regulate your body's stress response. They help to control the body's metabolism, and it also suppresses inflammation and regulates blood pressure, and even helps you to control your sleep-wake cycle. Let's take a closer look at the effects of cortisol in your body. With regards to regulating metabolism, cortisol will help to control how your body uses fat, proteins, and carbohydrates for energy. With regards to suppressing inflammation, in short spurts, cortisol can boost your immunity by limiting inflammation. However, if you have consistently high levels of cortisol, your body can get used to having too much cortisol in your blood, which can lead to inflammation and a weakened immune system. With regards to the function of cortisol in regulating blood pressure, there's still a lot that needs to be cleared up. However, it has been shown that elevated levels of cortisol can cause high blood pressure, and lower than normal levels of cortisol can cause low blood pressure. Therefore, there's a direct link to the amount of cortisol with regards to regulating blood pressure. With regards to increasing and regulating blood sugar, under normal conditions, cortisol will actually counterbalance the effect of insulin, which is a hormone that's produced by the pancreas, and we'll see this in the next learning outcome. So cortisol will counterbalance the effect of insulin to regulate your blood sugar. Therefore, cortisol raises blood sugar by releasing stored glucose, while insulin lowers blood sugar. And when you have chronically high cortisol levels, this can lead to what we call hyperglycemia, which is persistent high blood sugar levels. And this can cause type 2 diabetes. Next, we have the influence of cortisol in helping to control your sleep and wake cycles. And again, under normal conditions, you have lower cortisol levels in the evening when you go to sleep and peak levels in the morning right before you wake up. And this suggests that cortisol plays a significant role in the initiation of wakefulness, and therefore it will play an important part in the body's circadian rhythm. Lastly, we have the zona reticularis, which is the smallest of all the zones, and normally it secretes small amounts of sex hormones, which in this case are the androgens. Remember that the most common androgen is testosterone. However, in the adrenal gland, the androgen that is most commonly released is the hormone that's called dihydroepiandrosterone, or DHEA. And this hormone will stimulate the development of pubic hair in boys and in girls right before puberty. But while this hormone is not very important for adult men, because they will have the testes that will produce large amounts of androgen, in women, in adult women, androgen will promote muscle mass, stimulate blood cell formation, and also support libido. Now remember that we had another hormone that influenced libido, and this is the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4, where low levels of these hormones will decrease libido. So in addition, the overproduction of adrenal androgens in females can lead to, for example, a husky voice, even menstrual irregularities, and in male, it can cause patterns of baldness. So this is why it's important to maintain a normal balance, maintain homeostasis within the body in regards to the levels of hormones. Now that we have already talked about the adrenal cortex, we're going to be covering the adrenal medulla, which is the neuroendocrine tissue that's composed of these postganglionic sympathetic nervous system neurons right over here. These modified neurons, there are what we call the chromaffin cells, as we see here on this image. And it is really an extension of the autonomic nervous system, which will regulate homeostasis in the body. So the sympathomedullary pathway, or SAM, which is this pathway between the sympathetic nervous system and the adrenal medulla, involves the stimulation of the medulla by impulses that are coming from the hypothalamus via the neurons that are present in the thoracic spinal cord. Maybe you can recall from the lecture of the autonomic nervous system that the nerves that leave the thoracic and the lumbar regions are part of the sympathetic neurons, and the ones that leave the brain and the sacral regions are part of the parasympathetic neurons. Therefore, when the impulses arrives in the medulla, it stimulates the two cell types in this region to secrete epinephrine and norepinephrine. Epinephrine can be called adrenaline, and norepinephrine can be called noradrenaline. Both will prepare the body for the fight or flight response to stress, but adrenaline has slightly more of an effect on your heart, and norepinephrine has more of an effect on your blood vessels. Now remember that these hormones, they're being released by endocrine glands. So this means that this response will last longer than the response from the sympathetic activation. In addition, you have 3 times more epinephrine being released than norepinephrine. And this is why after you have a fight or flight response, it takes your body a while to return to its normal state because of these long-lasting effects of the hormones that are being released into the blood vessels instead at the synaptic sites. Therefore, from listening all the functions that occur at the adrenal cortex and the adrenal medulla, we can conclude that one of the major functions of the adrenal gland is to respond to stress. Now, stress can either be physical or psychological or even both. And the physical stresses will include, for example, exposing the body to injury, walking outside in the cold and wet conditions without a coat, for example, or even malnutrition. And psychological stresses include the perception of a physical threat to you, like a fight with a loved one or just a bad day at school. Hopefully, you guys aren't having any of those. Now, the body responds in different ways to short term stress and long term stress following a pattern that is known as the General Adaptation Syndrome or GAS. Stage 1 of GAS is what we call the alarm reaction. In this short term stress, the fight or flight response will be mediated by the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine from the adrenal medulla via the SAM pathway. What is the SAM pathway? Well, it's the pathway that we covered on the previous slide, which is the sympathomedullary pathway, which basically is telling us that it's the pathway between the sympathetic nervous system and the adrenal medulla. And their function is to prepare the body for an extreme physical exertion. And once the stress is relieved, the body quickly returns to normal. Now, if the stress is not soon relieved, then the body adapts to the stress in the second stage that's called the stage of resistance. So if a person is, for example, starving, the body may send signals to the gastrointestinal tract to maximize the absorption of nutrients from the food, and that will control a little bit the starvation effects and have some nutrients circulating in the body. Now, if the stress continues for a longer term, however, the body will respond with symptoms that are quite different than the fight or flight response. So during the stage of what we call stage of exhaustion, individuals, they may begin to suffer depression, the suppression of their immune response, severe fatigue, or even a fatal heart attack. And these symptoms are going to be mediated by the hormones of the adrenal cortex, especially cortisol, that will be released as a result of the signals from the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. Therefore, optimal cortisol levels are necessary for life and for maintaining several bodily functions. So if you have consistently high or low cortisol levels, it can have very negative impacts on your overall health. Listed here, I also have a few of the physiological changes that are going to support the fight or flight responses. So this is like, I gotta run and I gotta fight to stay alive. For this, you need energy. So the liver will convert glycogen to glucose. The blood vessels will constrict. You need to increase blood pressure. Sweat glands will increase their secretion as sweating is under control of the sympathetic nervous system. Your lungs will have to work harder because you're using up more oxygen. Your heart also will accelerate for the same reason. Digestion, well, digestion will slow down. Do you need to continue the digestion right now? No, digestion can wait. And tunnel vision with regards to the eye, you need to focus where you're going to. So you need to be alert. And I think that with all of these different changes that occur in our body, it's important for us to realize how interconnected all of our body functions are. If one thing, one hormone level goes off track, it affects several body functions. I know that it's hard, but sometimes we need to try to control our stress level. One recipe does not work for all. You need to find something that will calm you down and take your mind away from what's creating the stress. And I know that it's easier said than done, But search online or look for help if you feel that you're unable to resolve your stress to a point where you're already at the last stage, and this might cause depression. So it's important to get these symptoms treated as soon as possible to avoid getting to this point. And if you don't know where to look for help and you need help, just reach out. Send me an email and I will definitely help you out or do the best that I can to help you out.